Welcome back to Out of Left Field. We have a very special guest on air today. We've been looking forward to doing this podcast for quite a long time. And today, in studio, we have renowned journalist, Jacobin contributor, and author, Leigh the Tank Phillips. Welcome to the show, sir.
Hi. It's I'm happy to be here.
They do call you the Tank, right?
No, nobody calls me the Tank.
Well, they do now.
Nobody has ever called me the Tank. I was like, the worst athlete in high school. I'm the opposite of the tank. Whatever the opposite of a tank is, I'm.
Yeah. Well,
what is the opposite of a tank?
Helicopter,
a mouse, rubber dinghy.
Yeah, there we go. That sounds like the opposite of a tank.
That's not really a good.
Leigh, the rubber dinghy
Phillips. Anyway, welcome to the show, and today we're going to talk about Austerity Ecology and the Collapse-Porn Addicts. That was published in 2015?
Yeah, November 2015.
I fucking love this book, Leigh.
Thank you.
I've read it 3 times. I've bought it 4 times.
That's crazy. That's ridiculous.
I know. No, but I bought copies too.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I bought a copy for myself. I bought a copy to lend to my friends and as many people as possible. I bought a copy that I gave to Nikki Ashton when she was in Victoria, and I've also just purchased a new copy today.
And I still need to get my copy back from you.
Yeah, that's true. But I honestly think
thank you for all the royalties. That's
you're welcome.
Hey, pennies on the dollar, man. They add up.
No, but honestly, I think anybody that's like remotely left-wing needs to read this book. In fact, all of you listeners out there, if you don't read this book, I will find out who you are, I will track you down, I will find out where you live, and I will personally deliver a copy of Leigh Phillips' wonderful book, Austerity Ecology and the Collapse-Porn Addicts. So we're actually going to give away for free a signed copy of one of these books today on Studio. The first person to tweet us at RealUlf, at Leigh Phillips. What is your Twitter handle?
It's Leigh_Phillips.
Leigh, okay. So the first person to tweet at RealUlf, at Leigh_Phillips is the dog's bollocks. We'll get a signed copy of this book. In fact, Leigh, why don't you sign this book right now?
Sure.
Live on air.
I hate to point this out, but this isn't exactly a visual medium.
No.
But
that noise there was me stretching because the other chair is far away.
And you can like draw a dick butt in there too if you want, just for like some added zest.
What are they gonna do, right?
And there's actually a complimentary bookmark that will also ship from what National Geographic magazine considers to be the best bookstore in the world, Monroe's Books on Government Street.
Yeah, they considered the best bookstore in the world.
The best in the world.
I mean, it is pretty damn good. Like, I mean, my favorite bookstores in the world are probably the Athenaeum in Amsterdam.
Of course. Amsterdam.
I like that one in Portland, the big ass one.
Oh, I've never been to Portland.
It takes up like an entire fucking city block. It's awesome.
City Lights in San Francisco.
Yeah.
It's pretty. It like really lives up to the reputation, and of course, the cliche Shakespeare and Company in Paris. And now this worldly person he's traveled to. He's been to Amsterdam and he's been to Paris.
You're so cultured, Leigh.
Ooh. Been to San Francisco.
Wow,
but he's never been to Portland, even though he lives.
You've never been to the crappier places on the way to those beautiful, shining, bright lights of culture and art. No.
Did you sign the book?
Oh, sorry. Right. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Live on air. He's currently signing it. With comradely love.
We swear this is actually happening. This isn't just a
ruse.
Comradely love.
Oh, fucking A.
Comma.
Perfect.
But I didn't do the dick butt because I thought
it's hard to do a good dick butt.
Oh no, you need to have to have a dick butt sort of on hand to copy it. You forget bits, right? Well, all right, let's get on to the what I guess is the content of this book and its sort of purpose. There's a lot of things going on in the world, and certainly were a lot of things going on in 2015. And I guess, why exactly did you consider this to be the issue worth spending time writing a whole book on?
Well, I guess, I'm a science journalist by trade, and I'd been working on environmental issues and climate, in particular climate science, for a lot of that. I mean, I cover a lot of other issues as well, but probably climate change is one of the main ones. And you go down a road of, you're working quite hard to try to expose the lack of an evidence base from climate skeptics or climate deniers. And, you keep going down that road. And so you're paying very close attention to the science. You're reading a lot of scientific papers and speaking to a lot of researchers. And I guess I started to notice that it wasn't just on the right that there was this indifference to scientific evidence or the scientific consensus, that I found that there was a lot of people on our own side who were playing fast and loose with the evidence as well, that were indifferent to scientific consensus, whether it was things like opposition to genetic engineering, even though scientific academies around the world have put out statements and saying there is as much of a scientific consensus on the safety, health and environmental safety of genetic engineering, of GMOs, as there is as much of a consensus around this as there is a consensus around climate change, anthropogenic climate change. When it comes to issues like that, the left suddenly says, "Oh, well, science doesn't know everything," and so it's
I don't know. It just reminded me of there have been plenty of protests that I've marched in where there's there I am and next to me is some guy complaining about GMOs or vaccines or something.
Yeah.
And it's just like, what the hell is going on?
What the fuck are you doing here, man?
Yeah, it does feel like that.
That's kind of like what your book is. That's kind of the general sums it up.
Yeah.
Like in terms of like the green left. Like, what the fuck are you doing here? Like,
yeah, it was
the anti-science, the
exactly.
anti-progress kind of. I think though, for our listeners who aren't as familiar with the book, we should define both austerity ecology and collapse porn.
Right.
So what? How would you sum up? Like, what would you say austerity ecology means?
Okay, so austerity ecology is my term for those people who, on the left or green left, who articulate a position suggesting that the cause of environmental problems, of disruption of ecosystem services upon which our human civilization depends, are caused by growth. I make the argument, which is actually a very, very old argument. You can go back to Friedrich Engels in the 19th century with his arguments against the Reverend Malthus, the initiator of the theory of human overpopulation.
Right.
Engels, Marx, other figures on the left argued with him at this time. And in any case, so basically the argument that I'm making is an updating of that argument for the 21st century, for the Anthropocene, if you will. So austerity ecology is basically making the argument that if you are saying that we in the West, or we as humans, consume too much, it's interesting that we're talking about this just after Black Friday, because I talk about this in the book as well, that, Black Friday was just, it was 3 days ago. And once again, there was all this stream of criticism from the green left, from the left in general, attacking people for these over-consuming, buying their flat-screen TVs and their dishwashers, and don't you know that, we're consuming too much on this planet. We have to retreat from consuming too much. Black Friday is really emblematic of this. If you go back to the late 1990s, early 2000s with the anti-globalization movement, or as we called it at the time, the global justice movement, and Naomi Klein's first book, No Logo, this was a real critique, a very strong critique of consumerism. Yeah. And at the time, when I was at university in the late 90s, I remember a lot of sort of anarchist types would go around the day after American Thanksgiving. It would be Buy Nothing Day.
Buy Nothing. That's how you start the book. That was the first chapter of it. And what I liked about when you started it, like in the Battle of Seattle in 1999, right, and like the anti-WTO protests, and you had all these Buy Nothing Day people, and in the book you're like, well, I was like a poor college student at the time, and I was looking forward to Buy Something Days.
Yes,
like, who the fuck
exactly.
are these people?
Yeah, no, some finally able to fucking buy something, so actually buy something days. Yes.
Yeah.
And this is the point, is that I felt completely alienated from these middle class wankers who were going around saying, "We consume too much. We consume too much." I was, drowning. I was up to my tits in student loans. My parents had there was issues with my family financially, so there was no money. And I was just like, what the hell are you saying? We are consuming too much. There were days where I'd gone to the food bank, and I was a student. It was absolutely absurd. And then you that's just me. That's just my own personal experience. But when you look at it in a very serious way, if you since the late 1970s, early 1980s. The Western working class, there's so much data on this. The Western working class, most Western countries, has seen no increase in real wages. So once inflation is taken into account, no real wage increases since the 1980s. Inequality has increased dramatically in the West since then. And so for somebody to say the Western working class, they make no distinction between the wealthy and the working class. It's all humans.
Yeah. The West.
We need to tighten our belt again.
We need to tighten our belt again. This is exactly what Thatcher was saying. This is exactly what today the European Central Bank says to Greece when they say that Greece's working people, they have too high a wage. They need to they need to slash their wages. They need to slash not just their wages but their social wage as well. Because if you're cutting social programs, that means you have to spend more of your income on all these other services you would otherwise get for free. So basically, in effect, it's the same thing, that it's still a cut to your wages. So every single time Naomi Klein or Bill McKibben or George Monbiot or any of these other figures, or Prince Charles, because he's all down with the like, we consume too much, as well, which is
after the Paradise Papers and all that. It's interesting to think about.
Yes. They are making exactly the same argument as Margaret Thatcher, as Ronald Reagan were in the 1980s, that working people
need to consume less.
So that's what I mean by austerity ecology.
What I felt like was really sobering about your book was that I was raised on the ideas of like anti-consumerism and stuff. Like you mentioned in the book also the origin of stuff, or what is that kids video?
The story of stuff.
Story of stuff. I remember watching that in high school, right, and I was part of a little global awareness group in high school that was like
so was I.
raising awareness of environmental
maybe not
issues.
Around Annie Leonard, but similar sort of thing.
Yeah, and I was like, I was the fucking poster boy for these ideas, and like reading your book was like, holy shit, nuclear power is amazing. Why didn't I see this before?
Well, we can absolutely, and we should have concerns about particular production processes. That's fine. There's absolutely nothing wrong with us being able to critique certain production processes. But here's the thing: is that we as socialists have a different argument. What we're not saying is you shouldn't have this stuff. You shouldn't have this. It's a little bit of joy, for fuck's sake, right? Like, if somebody has a big screen TV and they've got an Xbox, and at the end of the day, after like a hard day's work, and they come home and they're blissing out doing this. Like, how dare anybody say that is less worthwhile? That is somehow a terrible thing. That's a aesthetically inferior thing to, I don't know, buying little Johnny some like hand-carved, locally hand-woven,
a wooden little choo-choo train. Yeah.
There's a good part of your book that talks about this. I think earlier on you were talking about you're saying that early on humans observed that, like, if you take the nice juicy figs and use the seeds from those figs, more juicy figs grow. And,
this is the origin of agriculture.
Exactly. And you say here. Of course, one might argue that I'm being far too loose with the terms growth, progress, and invention, which begin to blur here, but then, as well they should, as perhaps what it means to be human is to invent, to progress, to grow, to constantly strive for an improvement in our condition, to overcome all barriers in our way, to never at any point sit back and relax and say, I think we're done here, we have enough, life does not need to get any better, these bitter figs will do. I love that part.
Wow, I like that. That's awesome. I haven't read that in ages. Of that, that's quite good.
Yeah, poetic. Yeah, you've been working on your new book, which we'll talk. I think we'll give you a good
Sure.
10 minutes to plug your new book at the end of the podcast, because I'm excited to hear that. But I think your book is like just a good manifesto for like in defense of progress and stuff.
Yes,
That we shouldn't like what you were saying before about how the Black Friday protests, the Buy Nothing Day people don't really make a distinction between the classes. They look at it through like a national, so like big picture, like, on the West, on average, we consume more, and on average, the global South consumes less. But in both instances, in both countries, you have rich classes of people that consume a shitload, and then you have like the fucking peons at the bottom that make up the overwhelming majority of the population.
Like those douchebags in Saudi Arabia just sort of tooling around the desert in Hummers, like that kind of shit. And I'm supposed to be like, oh yeah, me, I'm the fucking problem.
And again, if you look at the statistics in terms of wealth and division of wealth in both Western societies and developing countries, you raise a really good point there that the Saudi elite have much more in common in terms of their wealth and consumption with our own elite. And we actually, in terms of our own, if you're talking about the bottom classes in Western countries, we have much more in common, even in terms of wealth, with the poor in the developing world than we do with our own. So to talk about the West as some sort of unitary entity ignores all the statistics about the division of classes.
It's ironic because I was reading an article today about, it was the usual sort of green left argument, except in this case, this guy was actually taking the wealth inequalities and arguing against progress anyway. He was basically saying that because of, basically since the 1980s, that, productivity and wages have sort of become disjuncted and, the working class isn't getting its share anyway, like it used to. That progress all still doesn't matter because it's like, well, 60, the top percentile is still getting the majority of the progress. Therefore, progress is bad.
But it's not that the top percent necessarily gets the top of the progress. They get the
wealth, but yeah,
the wealth. I mean, some of that,
but that's
in terms of the products of progress.
But I think it was just ironic to me that this guy was like sort of groping around the actual problem, but still ended up just sort of ending up right back into environmentalism. It's, yes, the problem is that the very wealthy capitalists at the very top of society are basically just scooping up the whole of, any benefit to progress today is basically being squandered into a class that actually can't find any way to invest most of this money. And yet he doesn't say, and that's why we should abolish the capitalist class. That's why we should just give up on progress, because progress is just not impossible.
It's just a ruse.
It's just impossible now. It just can't be done.
I mean, it's just not even true. I mean, something like 2 billion people now have access to smartphones. So, yes, it was not the case that everybody, upon the advent of smartphones, that everybody, all the working class around the world, had immediate access to this. But we do now. Now, under a much more egalitarian system, it would not be the case that only the elites would get first access to this. It would be a much more egalitarian process, making sure everybody has access to this. Once we, for example, medical breakthroughs. We in Canada, for all of the limitations of our public healthcare system, if there is some new breakthrough in terms of healing some particular disease or something like that. That will be immediately available to everybody. It's not, whereas in the United States, it is restricted to the wealthiest. So the argument that progress itself we need to get rid of because of the inequality, this muddled thinking, a more socialist society, and ultimately a socialist society, is what will ensure that progress is delivered to everybody. The second thing that I would say about this in terms of progress is, the historic argument that socialists made, you can go back to Marx, even the Communist Manifesto, but this is riddled throughout all of Marx's writing, is that he thought that it was just amazing what capitalism, like industrial capitalism, had achieved. He thought it was just absolutely incredible and horrific at the same time. It was incredible, the productivity gains, the technological breakthroughs. absolutely stunning. But he was furious, absolutely furious, one, that it was not extended to everybody, that not everybody had access to the fruits of modernity. And he was also, and this was really crucial to him, was that he thought, well, bloody hell, you're in the market, you will only be, under capitalism, you will only produce those bits of progress, let's say, under which you can make money. There's all these other things. I mean, in Marxist terminology, we talk about use value versus exchange value, but it's junk, the jargon. Basically, things that are useful to all of society, but are not profitable. They don't have any exchange value, but are still useful to society. We're not going to make those. Now, in converting that into sort of contemporary context, think about antibiotics. Antibiotics were absolutely amazing breakthrough, all but eliminated infectious disease, but without going to the details of the science of infectious disease, basically we are constantly in a war with bacteria, and as a result of evolution, they've developed resistance to most of the suite of antibiotics that we've developed over the years, and more bacteria are resistant to different antibiotic families of antibiotic. But for about 30 years, Big Pharma has not been investigating new families of antibiotic, and the reason is because it's not profitable. I mean, it is a little bit profitable, but it's so insufficiently profitable that they just don't. Well, why would you produce? And why would you spend $1 billion or more on it to develop a drug
that you can't sell?
Not that you can't sell, because you can sell it, but that somebody takes once or twice for a few weeks or maybe a few months at the most, and then they're done. Whereas you can produce for the same amount of money, the same R&D budget, and et cetera, you can produce a drug that somebody who has a chronic disease, they have to take that drug every day, or maybe many times every day, for the rest of their life. You're going to make a lot more money doing that. And so, in fact, in terms of just their fiduciary duty, they have an obligation not to invest in research and development into new families of antibiotic. The only way that we've been able to go down this road is there are researchers at universities, largely public, or major medical charities that are funding investigation into new families of antibiotic. But even there, it is so expensive to engage in the trials, and effectively, basically, what we're talking about is the commercialization at the end of this. And they need industrial partners to produce this, and they won't. They simply won't do this because there's no way to make sufficient amount of money. So to return to what I was saying before, when we talk about progress and our concerns as socialists about capitalism, and Marx, his original concerns, he loved capitalism, he loved industry, but he thought, my God, you're only, as incredible as you are, production is limited to what is profitable. The set of all things that are useful is much larger than the set of all things that are profitable. So Marx was saying, we could have so much more. We could produce so much more. We could have so much more progress. So when the Green Left says we don't need any, progress is a trap, or that we have enough, Marxism responds and says, what the hell are you talking about? There's so much more that we could have.
Who is we? Who are you talking about? The rich have plenty, but
It's interesting, even the rich are limited by this because the rich need new classes of antibiotic as well. Bacteria don't care how wealthy you are.
That's true. They don't give a fuck.
If, I have, these endless nightmares about dying of multi-drug resistant tuberculosis because it's just it's like the perfect microbe. But that's another story. And I've written a lot of articles about drug resistant multi-drug resistant and extensively multi-drug resistant tuberculosis, and it's absolutely frightening.
Yeah, that sounds like a bag of dicks.
I think I think all that's really interesting because usually the way it's been presented to me, at least, has been that people use antibiotic hand soap too much, and drug resistance is just a natural consequence of incompetent use of antibiotics. and then that's it. Like, well, hopefully we'll never be in a situation where antibiotics will stop working, but basically this is it. Like, and that is just seems to be how it's presented in the news.
Yeah. No,
it's just kind of like,
there's an element of truth to that, in the sense that irrationally excessive use of antimicrobial products, not just antibiotics, but any sort of antimicrobial products, is speeding up the evolution of drug resistance, but it isn't the cause. That's just evolution. No matter, think about it. If back to your grade school biology classes, and you're first learning about evolution, and you remember the moths, right? The moths during the Industrial Revolution. There's some black moths, and there's some gray moths, and there's some white moths. And then with the Industrial Revolution, all the birch trees or whatever that used to be white are now covered in soot. Some of them are gray and some of them are black. And the white moths, they die out because they can easily be spotted by predators against the gray sooty tree trunks now, or the black sooty tree trunks. And so that's just evolution. So similarly, if we begin to use antibiotics, there will be some microbes that have random mutations that allow them to be not susceptible to antibiotics. The more that we use antibiotics, the more, and those will survive whenever we use them. That's going to happen whatever we do. But the more that we use antibiotics, the faster that process happens.
Right.
So we can't get away from that. There's no sort of silver bullet. Well, I mean, I won't say there's no silver bullet, but there's certainly no silver bullet with antibiotics. And so researchers are very aware of this, that we're in a constant, never-ending evolutionary arms race with bacteria, and we basically given up. Capitalism has given up on that arms race.
Trying to win that
arms race.
Yeah.
We constantly have to be coming up with new weapons that are better than last weapons.
Yeah, except
they've given up on it.
They're more concerned
but
with...
the microbes haven't given up.
No, well, sure. They're not profit-driven.
Capitalism's happy with new erectile dysfunction treatment drugs, and because they make a shitload of money, so you can have all sorts of funding for that. But also...
Well, I'll even go... It's fun to make fun of anti-erectile... erectile dysfunction drugs and like anti-balding drugs, which nobody's actually solved yet, but that so much research goes, and this is absolutely bonkers compared to something so much more dangerous like infectious disease. At the same time, it's interesting. We could talk about the development of AIDS drugs, even though it was absolutely amazing what the AIDS activists in the late 80s, early 90s were engaged in. Just absolutely heroic stuff, and I talk about it in the book as well. The activists at the time, they thought that because it was drug users and gay men who were and immigrants who were primarily the victims of this particular disease, that the drug companies weren't interested in them. And there was an element of truth to that, certainly. But what they later realized was that they were, in many respects, actually pushing at an open door, because AIDS isn't curable. HIV isn't curable. But what they can do is they can produce drugs that people who have HIV have to take cocktail drugs that they have to take every day for the rest of their lives. That's actually super profitable.
Yeah.
So we have to recognize it's not just as socialists. We have to recognize that, and that's good. That's a wonderful thing. That's an absolutely incredible, amazing thing. But that's a disease that drug companies really like. That's a great one to do. Diabetes is another one, and we don't dismiss insulin. The drug companies can do some absolutely wonderful things. It's just that they'll only do the wonderful things so long as it's profitable. If something is wonderful but it doesn't make any money, they won't do it. And that's the problem.
Yeah, well, what you were saying before about the Canadian medical system versus the American medical system, about everyone has access to this, but the Yankees don't. That's partially true, but what about the cystic fibrosis medications that's costing $500,000 or $750,000 a year to to treat, and the government kind of has to go on a case-by-case basis. It's like, well, is this one human life worth this price tag? And, it's basically my point is that the pharmaceutical industry should be nationalized and put under workers' control.
Over and over again. Let's go down the list.
I just wanted to shoehorn that in there.
I agree with you, absolutely.
Crack open the encyclopedia and start nationalizing whatever you find in there.
It is absolutely absurd that I would say that, in most countries, we recognize that it is absolutely absurd to have the fire service in the private sector, because if you had it in the private sector, everything would burn down.
Sorry, I didn't pay my $20 fee this month. Just let my children die in my house,
So overwhelmingly, the fire service is in the public sector. And I would say that the pharmaceuticals are just as important. It is absolutely absurd that pharmaceutical industry is in the private sector. It should be taken over. Should be a national pharmaceutical service.
We got sidetracked for all the good reasons, but I just wanted to wrap up one of the previous questions that I asked about. We defined austerity ecology,
right?
But who are the collapse-porn addicts,
right?
And what is collapse porn?
So that was the other side of this argument, or how I introduce it, is that there really does seem to be a very popular collapse porn aesthetic these days. People people love their collapse porn.
People love zombie movies. People love world-ending destruction movies.
It's everywhere. It's fucking everywhere. But it's not just the movies. In fact, if anything, that's just a sort of reflection of the broader intellectual philosophical malaise. You cannot go for a day without reading in The Guardian or The Atlantic or New Republic or whatever it happens to be, even Jacobin, some story about the end of the world. Actually, Jacobin's pretty good on this stuff, but about the end of the world.
Yeah,
they talk about even the discourse within climate movement, within the environmental movement, is that we need to save the planet. The planet is fine. The planet does not need saving. Humans are, the ecological services upon which our civilization depends are under threat. That's a real issue. But in terms of the end of the world, in fact, if anything, the more and more evidence that we find how robust life is, how difficult it is to get. The only way that we now think that it would be possible to sterilize the planet, basically get rid of all life on the planet, is within a couple of billion years, when the sun expands into a red giant and swallows up the Earth, and even then, maybe the Earth explodes and there's some rocks go, asteroids and comets, and microbes within those rocks could potentially land. So there are microbes that are able to exist in the vacuum of space, who live and thrive in the most acidic environments, in the hottest environments on Earth that you can imagine. So life is robust. Human life is not robust.
One of my favorite parts of your book is how you tackle this myth that if you somehow remove humans from nature, then you get this perfect balance of perfect harmony. You know, that humans are the problem, and that growth and industry and stuff are the problem. That this is commonly with a common belief amongst the collapse-porn addicts, as you call them, and you, as you demonstrate in the book, that's completely fucking untrue. Yeah. You know, and Mac, I am going to do this just because you hate it when I do this, but to quote Zizek, nature is a series of mega catastrophes. Like you have a whole chapter in this book about
nature is red in tooth and claw.
Nature doesn't give a shit who lives and who dies. Like
that's right,
like there was five mass extinctions before humans were ever around.
We spent all that time talking about AIDS and all these other diseases and bacterial infections, and that is just life finding a way to fucking ruin us. But hey,
I like the Jurassic Park quote.
What are you gonna
finds a way.
No matter how miserable and suffering and unpleasant it might be for us,
and
doesn't matter.
That's a really common thought. It's a common belief amongst the Green Left that humans are this cancerous tumor on the planet Earth, and that we are causing all the problems. And obviously, humans are causing a shitload of problems, but it's not humanity or industry itself that's the problem, but it's the market.
It's the market. Yeah.
It's the market. That's the problem.
And the problem is not so much it's for ourselves. Like, we're causing these problems for human civilization. But let me offer a thought experiment. Imagine that we find this planet, we find this exoplanet. We discover this, there's thousands of candidate exoplanets now that we're discovering, which is absolutely amazing. Let's say we discover this exoplanet, which is identical to the Earth, but there's no intelligent life there. And then we notice that through a completely natural process, there is an increase in carbon dioxide or other greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. What would we care? We would just think, oh, that's an interesting biological, geophysical phenomenon. That's a curious thing that's happening. And this is, in fact, what we're doing there is this thought experiment. Basically, we're talking about the Earth. We're talking about the Earth before humanity. Yeah. And humanity is only 200,000 years old.
So global warming only matters because
it matters for us.
For us.
Yeah. As you said, we've had 5, maybe 6. It depends how you count them. If you count the Great Oxygenation Event, then it's 6 previous mass extinction events, long before humans. We only care about climate change and biodiversity loss and these other issues because they undermine the ecosystem services upon which we depend. There is an optimum temperature for human flourishing, and we're rapidly moving out of that Goldilocks temperature. That's why we care about climate change. We depend on a whole range of different ecosystem services in terms of filtering of water and the fertility of the soil and a range of hundreds of other different services that ecosystems deliver to us as humans that we can't survive without. And we're undermining some of those.
Every single one of them.
Well, not every single one of them. I mean, we solved one a few years ago.
Ozone.
The ozone layer, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but it's us who care. It's us that matter. Life, if conditions change, there will be some organisms that thrive in those new conditions and other organisms that die out. We're one of the organisms that might die out, and that's why we care about this stuff. So the irony is that when the Green Left is constantly saying, how dare you be anthropocentric, you need to be biocentric. The most biocentric position you can have is saying the climate change doesn't matter, the biodiversity loss doesn't matter, because life itself does not care. It's humans that care. In order to care about climate change, in order to care about biodiversity loss, you have to care about humans. It's humans that matter. Why do we matter? It's because we're the universe becoming aware of itself. We're very, very special. We know of no other species that is intelligent in the universe. And it is an absolutely special thing that we are aware. We can do science. We can look up at the stars and we can write poetry about the stars. And until we came along, the universe was meaningless, effectively.
So I was never an environmentalist, and this is sort of the part where environmentalism always irritated me. This idea that there are too many people, or that's the problem. To me, people were sort of the bedrock of my principles, in a sense. Like, any political movement that says that there's too many people, I just check out on. I don't fucking care. And that's sort of what really put me off of the vast majority of what environmentalists have had to say, in my lifetime at least. Just this attitude of there's too much stuff. Sure, I mean that may be true to some extent in limited ways, but it's not the stuff, the hatred of stuff that I have a problem with, as much as that underlying hatred for humanity.
This misanthropy.
Yes.
This underlying misanthropy. Yeah.
It's one thing to talk about, Mother Earth and the biosphere and how wonderful it would be to maintain the biodiversity that we have currently. And that's all. And I agree. It'd be nice. It's no good losing species to happenstance or to our own incompetence or corruption or our eternal quest for profits. But the many thousands of species of spiders that have died out in the last 20 years. A, I have no idea who they are or what they are or why they would matter. And B, it still, for me, never was like a justification for any kind of reduction in the number of people on the planet. But that's...
Yeah, no, I mean, this is a really, really important point, is that if you're a socialist, you start from a love of other humans. You think that we're wonderful and that we're very special. And you want to make sure that everybody is able to flourish to their maximum ability.
Yeah.
And that capitalism withholds the ability to flourish to your full capability.
Exactly, and the problem I have with the misanthropic view is just how it undermines everything else that I care about. I mean, all this talk...
It's the opposite of socialism.
Well, but even just like all this talk about medicine and housing and food. I mean, if there's too many people, if the population needs to be reduced, then why fund medical research at all? Why not just introduce austerity in order to slowly reduce the population?
That was Malthusian's the idea that we just fuck the poor, let them die out because they breed too quickly.
That's exactly right.
And that's exactly the kind of
you see it today. I mean, you take
in the Green Left.
The most extreme versions of this is deep ecology or deep green resistance. People like Derek Jensen, John Zerzan. If anything, I actually have some level of respect for them in that they're actually just taking the Green Left's argument to its logical conclusion. If you really do think that humans are a problem,
then get rid of humans.
Derek Jensen, he's very straightforward with this. He says he would be very happy with a mass sort of holocaust of humanity where most of the 7 billion humans on the planet dying off. He said that would be a fantastic thing. Honestly, this is fascism on steroids. I mean, it's a couple of orders of magnitude larger than 6 million Jews. This is a profoundly reactionary ideology.
Well, I have bad news for what's-his-nuts. Even if 99% of human beings perished, we would still be the dominant species on the planet. So,
well, I suppose he would want all of them to die. And maybe we'll build
he's happy with just a few thousand left.
So we can just be like,
but he will be amongst the,
of course he would. That's fucking eugenic.
Every single goddamn time I've heard this thing, it's like, well, the 500 million, 50 million, 10,000 people who will get to live. Hey, guess what? It's all the clever people. The
people like me.
The smart. No. Yeah, and I would love to see a world in which we would just. It was just the capitalists of the world, the very, very wealthy, smart, clever people.
What, you mean I actually have to work now?
Yeah.
What is this shit?
Of course to till the soil all day, every day, still probably not make enough food to feed me and my family?
Where's my maid? Where is... Oh, she perished in the giant Holocaust. Shit.
I always say to these people, well, you first then. I'm not just saying that. I have actually literally said that to the.
That's a legit response. Actually,
it's a little known fact, but I was very, very briefly in Earth First.
What is Earth First?
Earth First is this very radical environmental organization.
Okay.
Deep ecology sort of perspective. And I'd been working for Greenpeace, knocking on doors as a summer job, totally believing Greenpeace, like, they're going to save the planet, blah blah blah, and but they aren't going far enough, they're not radical enough. And then there was a guy at Greenpeace, and he said, hey, there's this group called Earth First in Vancouver, and you want to do some real radical action, you should join Earth First. So I joined them for a few months, and most of the stuff that we got up to was it was pretty lame. Like, we were just basic, for all of the stories about spiking trees in the woods and stuff like that. I was never involved in any of that stuff, and I don't think anybody that I was involved with was involved in that. Although I have no idea, because I was always I was too square. They said, I dressed just normally, and I didn't dress like a fucking hippie. I don't trust that.
You didn't look like a jackass, so they couldn't quite trust you.
But
it was also it was the same group of people who were involved in Friends of the Wolf, and we went one March, we went up to Alaska to protest the expansion of the wolf kill. In the drive up there, and there were like 2 cars, so we went up to Alaska from Vancouver, and as you do, like it's hours and hours and hours away, and so you're talking in the car about all sorts of philosophical issues, political issues, and the misanthropy thing comes up, the overpopulation issue and stuff like that. And as a socialist, I was totally opposed to all this stuff, and I actually at one point said, okay, well, you first, and he said, you know what, I have actually thought about it. So he's literally thought about committing suicide, that might be a useful tactic. I mean, it's bonkers.
That's
it's absolutely
super
bonkers.
fucked up.
But at least they're the deep ecologists are drawing.
Consistent?
They're consistent.
Yeah.
At least, whereas the Naomi Kleins of the world, the Bill McKibbins of the world, the Prince Charleses of the world. I almost said King Charles.
Well, soon enough.
Soon enough. Well, let's hope we're a republic before then. But
That'll never happen.
They say the same stuff about overpopulation and about humanity being a scourge on the earth, that we're vermin, we're a virus on the earth. But they never talk about themselves. It's always somebody else.
It's always the poors that are the problem.
It does tend to be the
Those
poor.
stupid people, the guys
nugget
who
munching.
the people who just spend all their time at McDonald's and buying crap they don't need from dollar stores, those wasteful pieces of shit who think that, the fact that you can go and buy a pair of sunglasses for $1 is a good thing. Those assholes.
Now, to be fair, Naomi Klein and Bill McKibben don't say that. Prince Charles does effectively say that, but Naomi Klein would say, no, I do care about the poor.
Oh, sure.
I think. But the logical conclusion of the overpopulation or the degrowth argument, which is the same argument, is actually that, we have too many people, therefore we need some sort of cull of people, therefore, Naomi, you first.
Some sort of...
that's super fucking fascistic.
Some sort of cull, yeah.
Okay, well, actually, that's a good segue. I mean, you spent an entire book here writing railing against the Green Left. Mm-hmm. Do you think that the Green Left, how influential do you think they are on the left? Because for the most part, we live in Victoria. We're surrounded by hippies, and they kind of, maybe they're unsightly, but they do their thing. And
it's all community gardens and municipal projects here. So it seems pretty harmless overall.
Yeah, it's like silverfish. They're unsightly, but they just kind of do their thing. They're not actually harming anything.
Well, they are in the sense that, let's take the example of the community gardens. If you want to do a community garden, fill your boots. It's actually, in terms of building community and hanging out with your friends and, your own allotment. That's a lovely, lovely thing. Go ahead and absolutely do it. But do realize that when you're doing this, it is much more land extensive to produce the products, the produce that you're producing, compared to industrial agriculture. And the number one cause of carbon emissions in agriculture isn't even beef production or rice production. It is land use change. So if we were to scale up their local community garden allotment program to the world, everybody would do that now, and we would have no industrial agriculture, and everybody now, 7 billion people, would be engaged in local community agriculture. The amount of land that we would have to use to do that would be so much larger than the current amount of land that industrial agriculture uses. Therefore, because land use change is the number one cause of carbon emissions from agriculture, you're suddenly massively jacking up the carbon emissions, even though doing your own community garden, your allotment, whatever, in itself, on its own, is basically harmless, and fill your boots doing it. The problem is not that. It is the suggestion that is what everybody should do, that at scale it's a problem.
Yeah, and that's a really sort of middle class, petty bourgeois kind of solution to it.
You know what? I don't even say that. I've got some good working class friends who absolutely love it. My granddad, had an allotment, building on the allotments that people used in the Second World War and stuff like that. And for most of his life, until he moved down to Cornwall, when he retired, he had an allotment. He loved it, absolutely loved it. I don't begrudge anybody engaging in community agriculture or community gardens or anything. Wonderful thing. I don't think it's a middle class thing at all. I think it's a lovely thing. What I'm just saying is, it's no climate solution.
Sure,
It's a nice hobby.
When I
a
said
nice hobby,
it was petty bourgeois, I meant like when you extend that argument to everybody, like it's an
Oh,
individualist.
yes.
Like, what can I do?
Absolutely,
Like, how can I play my part? And then you have a single mother with 3 part-time jobs over here, and you tell her the solution to her problems is to fucking make your own
Get
fucking
a 4th
food.
job
Get
being a crappy worst
agricultural
farmer.
laborer.
For
Like
fuck's sake,
yeah,
that's
but,
what I mean. It's kind of like a not a working class
Do you
kind
know
of answer.
exactly how much labor you have? I mean, like, at
The
end of-
labor
I don't
thing.
want to grow my own food. Fuck everything about that.
No, but that's the thing, right? I mean, hobbies are great and they're a lot of fun if you actually want to do it. But when it comes to, in the same way, I would say the same thing about, farming is like somebody working in their basement, just, carpentry or just dicking around with cars or whatever. That's
like
not a solution to anything.
Nobody suggests that. Well, you should construct all of your own furniture.
Yeah.
There was a guy
they still go to IKEA.
Yeah, no, of course, because it's A, it's cheaper, B, it's easier, and C, let's face it, it is actually quite often better made.
There was a guy that made his own chicken burger, and he like grew the grains, he raised the chickens, he like farmed the lettuce and all that, and it cost him like $1,500, and he said it didn't even really taste very good. But there's a difference between like a local individualist solution and something that we can apply to the entire fucking world to actually seriously try to tackle the problems of climate change. And that's the big difference between the sort of, locally grown, as you say in the book, organic woven carrot pants and turnip wranglers, versus something that like large scale actual infrastructure, like nationally planned projects that can seriously try to tackle climate change.
This is it. You've hit the nail on the head there. It is not that there is no challenge it's not that there are no problems with industrial agriculture. But the problem with industrial agriculture is the profit motive, not that it's industrial. Anytime that there's any problem with industrial agriculture, so long as something is cheap and profitable, they will continue to do it, and they will lobby governments to allow them to continue to do this. If you were in a socialist system where there was no longer a profit motive, and we discovered that there was a problem in one of our production processes within industrial agriculture, we would say, "Oh, damn, we should probably not do that anymore." All right, experts. So can we switch this for some other process? And they would say either, yeah, there's this other process, but it would require more resources, and this would have this effect on society, but we should balance it out with the detrimental environmental impact, and then you would make an assessment collectively, democratically, whether you move to this other process or not. At no point in that stage do you have to incentivize through carbon taxation or cap and trade measures
or subsidies
or whatever to try to convince a company that has no interest in switching to this new technology to switch to this new technology.
Well, that's the thing that really is probably the most remarkable thing about sort of environmentalism today is that. So looking at it that way, the way I would put it is that environmentalists have spent the last 30 years trying to trick capitalism into doing the right thing. Mm-hmm. Like trying to trick capitalism into not killing humanity. That has been a rather fruitless effort on their part. The planet's hotter now than it was 30 years ago. It's getting, pollution has increased every single year except for 2008, when the entire economy shuddered to a stop for about half the year.
Or you mean carbon pollution?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because if we're talking about air pollution,
and acid rain and things, better. Yes, there have been things that have been reduced. Yeah. But what I'm saying is, this is
through non-market mechanisms.
But this is sort of the thing that I always found the most bizarre about sort of the environmentalist movement is how often they will appeal to sort of this global apocalyptic vision. And then it reduces down to this, like, don't use plastic bags at your local grocery store solution bullshit. Like, it's very big in its fear and scariness, and then it's, yeah, I should recycle more, or I should take my bike every other day, or I should, make sure I turn my lights off when I exit a room. That kind of shit.
No, you've hit the nail on the head. It's, the collapse-porn or austerity ecology. I mean, you could also call it the sort of neoliberal catastrophism, in that it's the bizarre confluence of the end of the world, but there's no possible way that we could get rid of capitalism. It's even amongst those people who are criticizing capitalism, such as Noah McCline, they're not really criticizing capitalism. They're not really identifying the key issue within capitalism that causes environmental problems, the market, the search for profit. They're identifying growth as the problem. It's a complete distraction. It is bizarrely, even amongst people like Noah McCline who are raging against capitalism, ironically, at the very moment they do that, the horizon of their imagination is utterly captured by neoliberalism. They are not identifying the real problem within capitalism, the market, and the profit motive. They're looking at growth. The time that we could be spending as activists, environmental activists who are genuinely concerned about these issues, these are real issues and we do need to be concerned about them. Instead of identifying the real cause of them, we accept that that's fine because they even Noah McCline and certainly Bill McKibben accept that it's totally fine to have small businesses. It's just a smaller capitalism that they want. But the very mechanism that as Marxists that we've identified as being the cause of the environmental problem, the market and the profit motive, are left alone because any small business is still driven by the market. It still operates in the market, still is driven by the profit motive. So all you're doing there is now if there's a small business that does some shitty environmental thing, they will continue to be doing it and they will still be interested in continuing to do it. You're not actually stopping the incentive that recreates the environmental problems.
There's, as I mentioned earlier, there's a part of this book that blew my fucking mind, and it's when you talk about Avatar. So, right. And how, okay, no spoilers here, let me just read this. In a critique of James Cameron's 3D deep ecology space opera blockbuster Avatar, in which the hero, paraplegic Marine Jake Sully, is able to defeat interstellar imperialism only via Jensen-style primitivist rejection of his modernity, Fisher argues that the film is yet another example of corporate anti-capitalism, or Hollywood anti-capitalism, a gestural rather than substantive anti-capitalism where very frequently the villain in the movie is an evil corporation or immorality, greed, rather than material structural forces drive injustice. He laments how in Avatar, as in WALL-E and other contemporary Hollywood anti-capitalist films, what is available to us has been delimited to two wretched options, precisely as a result of capitalist realism. What is foreclosed in the opposition between a predatory technologized capitalism and a primitive organicism evidently is the possibility of a modern technologized anti-capitalism. Mm-hmm. It is in presenting this pseudo-opposition that Avatar functions as an ideological symptom. Green anti-modernity does not threaten neoliberalism. It is a manifestation of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's that quote includes stuff that I've written, but I'm also riffing off of the late Marxist philosopher Mark Fisher. Huge influence on me. This was a blog post that he'd written a review of Avatar, and it really, really struck me because I'd been looking for some sort of left that was comfortable with technology, very aware of environmental issues, but was not buying into this neoliberal catastrophism. And Mark Fisher really, really hit the nail on the head there with this description of this corporate anti-capitalism.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, really interesting, because basically what it is it doesn't look at the real structural issues within capitalism, the market, the search for profit, private property, et cetera, that are the issues. It's size. So it's the big corporation, not these other. As Marxists, what do? We're trying to identify the structural structures of the society that are causing the bad things to happen.
Yeah.
Which is a turn away from a sort of simplistic anti-capitalism of it's the big people doing bad things. It's a smallest beautiful anti-capitalism. There's a lot. I mean, let me put this another way. There's lots and lots and lots of different types of anti-capitalism. Marxism is just one type of anti-capitalism. Anti-Semitism is another type of anti-capitalism. It's the anti-capitalism of fools,
in a way,
yeah. Because it's the big Jew bankers kind. I mean, the people who are articulating this are clearly frustrated in their lot in life, but instead of identifying the real structures of capitalism as the problem, they're identifying individuals that they believe are representative of the system that they dislike, and they've identified that as Jews as opposed to the capitalist structures. In the same way, this is another kind of anti-capitalist. The Catholic Church is also anti-capitalist, but they're anti-capitalist from a fear of modernity. They hate modernity historically because of its. Capitalism challenged the feudal structures of Catholic domination of Europe. So there's many different flavors of anti-capitalism. Marxism is the only one that actually looks at the structures of capitalism and begins to unpick them and want to overcome them.
I agree. And also, I think the most important part about how the Hollywood depiction of anti-capitalism was always this big evil corporation, and it's and in Avatar, it's the back to the earth kind of
you never see
those people in those movies actually farming or producing.
No, but my point is, where is fully automated luxury gay space communism? That's what I want to see.
Yeah,
Star Trek.
Absolutely.
You're gonna have to go to Star Trek for that.
Yeah, no, for sure. No,
I mean, and even there, it's still pretty limited, but that's the closest you're going to get in pop culture.
Absolutely. Effectively, Star Trek is a socialist society. It's a little bit Stalinist because there's this very rigid hierarchy.
Well, the military has a strangely powerful role in everything.
Nevertheless. But what you never see in any of these things, there's never any, or very rarely do you see the person being the worker at a small local organic food company or whatever, coffee shop, who's being fucked over by their boss.
No, well,
but that would be interesting because then that is actually identifying the structure of the profit motive being a problem, the market being a problem. It doesn't actually matter what size the company is.
If anything, from my own experience, I'd say that, the smaller the business, the more local the capitalist, the more vicious and obnoxious they are in squeezing out profits in every single fucking penny and minute and second of your work. It's the vast corporation that's kind of this mindless, faceless, thoughtless thing where you can basically just do your job and who cares. But it's the guy who's the small business owner who's constantly following you around, micromanaging you, needling, constantly harassing at every single moment. And that's not something you're going to get in the average movie. It's, if anything, quite the other way around. It's like the CEO of the company will show up to fire the main character, even though this is apparently supposed to be a big business. That's the kind of logic the cultural kind of logic that's been presented. When, if anything, I would say it's the other way around. Small businesses are less efficient, which means that their margin of profit is lower, which means they got to work harder, exploit more, fuck people over more to make their business a thing. So therefore, they got to cut costs. They got to fucking find their business exists in the margins of capitalism, and they in many cases these guys know that, and so they have to. They're
squeezed between the big capitalists that can kill them any moment and labor that is constantly demanding higher wages and better conditions. Yeah. And they hate both. Therefore, they hate both labor and big capital. This is historically, as we know, the origins of fascism. It is that the nobility of the small business person, the yeoman farmer. And not to say that every small business person is a fascist. That's absurd. But just to say that there is no special nobility to being smaller rather than larger.
Yeah, and in your book, I like that you constantly argue for what you call big kit sort of solutions, where, yeah, you know what, if instead of having like 1,000 tiny fucking wind farms, instead of having a tiny
ass wind farm,
I love wind ass farms, ass wind farms.
Is that a renewable?
It is. I believe it is. It's entirely fart.
As long as it's lentil based, I suppose it's all good.
But instead of having 1,000 tiny
energy.
wind farms, the future's resource, you can have just like one big nuclear power plant or one big hydroelectric dam that can
or something
well, that's reliable. But one of my favorite parts of this book is when you talk about the resources required to build solar panels and wind energy and like all of this, where it requires concrete or requires copper and steel and iron ore and fiberglass and the heavy metal pollution produced by solar panels.
Oh yeah,
you know, like so
absolutely.
the proponents of wind and solar energy are often talk like, why have hydroelectric?
Right.
Why
not put
power?
solar panels on people's rooftops instead?
Yeah, and wind and solar and battery is what they always say.
This to me is sort of something of a seminal moment in my experience of environmentalism. I mean, Leigh, you were talking about your time, traveling up to Alaska and, you first and all that. For me, it was this, I was arguing with someone about solar panels on roofs specifically, and I was saying that, basically based on the very small amount of electricity you get out of this, more people are going to die from falling off of roofs when they're installing these devices and maintaining them than from a whole raft of all other projects other than coal and oil. Basically, the physical construction and installation of solar panels. And I was talking to him about this, and because he was just like saying solar panels are great. He was even just talking about it like free energy, basically, like the sun just is free and therefore it's free energy, so we don't need to worry about it anymore. And I was like, yeah, but you do actually have to fucking physically pay someone to install it and then pay someone to either clean the bird shit off of it or build machinery that can do that and maintain things, right? Like these have lifespans. It all has lifespans that need to be taken into consideration. And I was just kind of going off on this and saying like, yeah, people fall off of roofs all the time. Like putting up shingles is a really fucking dangerous job. Putting up solar panels does in fact lead to
statistically significant.
If we were to actually use solar panels on roofs as a substantial power source, it would lead to a substantial number of people dying from falling off roofs while they're installing this stuff. And he was like, I don't care. Those lives don't count.
Hey,
I was like, what?
If anything, that'll help the overpopulation problem.
Well, I guess so. And that was the point where I was just like, there is something really wrong going on here in this logic.
What we need to be able to do, if we're genuinely concerned about safety of different energy options, and everybody who talks about nuclear power, that's their number one concern. Fair enough.
Fukushima
and Chernobyl, right? 3 Mile Island. What we need to be able to do, we need to have a statistical look at this, and we need to see what are the number of deaths per terawatt hour.
Yeah.
Of per depending on the energy source, because sure there aren't that many deaths from installing solar panels on roofs at the moment, but if the rate of death is higher than the rate of death, i.e. the number of deaths per terawatt hour is higher than the number of deaths per terawatt hour for nuclear, then at the scale that nuclear deliver, if we were to upscale solar to the level of energy generation that the nuclear has at the moment, then you would have a much higher number of deaths. So, I mean, what you're referring to here in the book is there was a Swiss study that was the data from which was extrapolated by energy researchers they were looking at the Swiss researchers were looking at a number of different issues, but these other energy system researchers extrapolated from the data that they'd collected an assessment of deaths per terawatt hour for all of the major clean energy and dirty energy sources. So coal clearly is the worst. Highest number of deaths per terawatt hour.
It causes cancer in the population area that it exists in.
Air pollution.
Massive amount.
It's
like a
really, really, really bad.
perpetual low-scale Holocaust, basically.
That's a nice way of putting it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
No, it's terrible. Coal is fucking awful. Natural gas is really bad too, but it's not as bad as some others. But here's the crazy thing I was totally shocked about was what Mac was talking about. I was like, wow, seriously? There are more deaths per terawatt hour from solar?
Yeah.
And then for nuclear, even after Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, and Fukushima. Now, by the way, not a single person died at Fukushima as a result of the meltdown. 10,000 people died as a result of the tsunami and the earthquake. Not a single person died as a result of the meltdown.
Although they still have like a scalding cauldron of radioactive bullshit that they aren't sure what to deal with.
The most ridiculous thing about this is I will bet you that more people are going to die because of after Fukushima, right? Japan shut down all its nuclear power plants and then are relying on coal and oil from either the mainland or in their own country.
Right.
And that's, when we're talking about like causes of people's deaths, this is like the exact opposite of what you should do, because now more people are going to die because of that. And if 10,000 people died, it really depends on how long Japan keeps this up for. But realistically, if it's indefinite, inevitably more people will die from the coal power plants that they're forced to run than died from the tsunami, because that's just
but also,
what it actually does.
Also, tsunami is not a source of power anyway. So,
well, sure,
or at least not one that we. Yeah,
no, but
exactly.
they're presenting this as kind of like environmentalists have been presenting this like, well, the tsunami happened and Fukushima was devastating. The most obvious answer would be, hey, maybe we shouldn't be installing nuclear power plants in cheaper locations, and we should have been building them inland, where it would have been, to be fair, more expensive, but a hell of a lot safer.
No, absolutely.
And that would have been, that's another sort of like, well, hey, the profit motive is fucking people over.
Because TEPCO is a private company.
Yeah.
Right? So you've hit the nail on the head, is that one of the problems there was exactly this, is that it was cheaper to locate the reactors at this location. Oh, there's an interesting thing recent. Can't remember which organization it was, but it was a very, very large green environmental organization in the United States, and a pro-nuclear environmental campaigner had spoken to somebody who was in the leadership of this organization and said, come on, you know that nuclear is totally clean and that radiation is not the issue that we used to think it was, and that meltdown is not the issue that we used to think it was, and that advanced nuclear doesn't even have an issue with meltdown anymore anyway. Why don't you, and we desperately, our number one issue is climate change, why aren't you switching and supporting nuclear? And the executive of this green NGO in the United States responded and said, basically accepting that all that this other person said was true, said, if we switch to support for nuclear, we would lose all our donations.
Yeah, of course.
Grotesque. It is gross.
Well, that is sort of the situation they're in now, right? Where they've kind of gone down that cul-de-sac, and now what do you do, right?
Well, as I say, this is the problem with where the left in the 1980s moved from its base in the working class to
donors,
middle class donors.
Exactly, absolutely, to NGOs and the academy. Not that there's anything necessarily wrong per se with academics. I work at a university myself. Not that there's anything wrong with working for an NGO. Many of them do wonderful, wonderful things. But we cannot base the class movement, socialist movement, left-wing movement, in anything other than the class. The minute that we move away from the working class and we begin to have the majority of our leadership or the majority of our organizers based in NGOs and the academy, they have a particular material interest, which is different from the class as a whole. And NGOs, they are, I would say, self-licking ice cream cones.
Yeah.
They exist to exist. And that explains why this person at the head of whatever this organization, I can't remember, I can find for you later, why the head of, or this executive with this major, this huge multi-billion-dollar NGO in the United States said, we can't come out in favor of nuclear, even though effectively what this person is saying is that I know that we need to support nuclear, because if we did, we would lose all our donors. How different is that to a fossil fuel company in the Alberta oil sands saying, well, I know that climate change is real, and I know that coal and petroleum is causing climate change and it's a terrible thing, but dude, like,
money.
Right? Like I can't not produce this stuff. I would lose all my money if we would lose the company, the organization would lose all of its money if we stopped this tomorrow. It's exactly the same thing.
That kind of reminds me, back when I was in the senior high school, I went to this university model parliament thing.
Oh, you did too?
I did one of those things.
I remember that.
I did that. I was in NDP.
Of course, NDP.
It was a minority NDP government.
Yeah.
Weird how that is, right? Strange.
And so when I was in high school, I was involved with an organization called Free the Children, and it started by Craig Hilberger.
Oh, right.
Yeah, and they we raised money for to build a school in Sierra Leone, and we went to some of their conferences and their talks and their motivational speeches and stuff like that. And there was 2 times I had this this internal struggle, should I devote myself to politics or should I devote myself to charity and NGOs and stuff? And I liked the NGO stuff because it wasn't divisive. It didn't piss anybody off. It didn't step on anyone's toes, you know. And so for most of my high school, I was kind of in that camp. And then I went to the University Model Parliament. There's this Conservative Party guy there. And I saw him at one of the Free the Children speeches, conferences or something like that. And I recognized him as one of the conservatives from University Model Parliament. I was like, what the fuck are you doing here? I thought conservatives were just against humanity and just wanted to crush everyone into grinding poverty death spirals into forever. And he was like, oh no, charity's great. It's the way that we can redeem ourselves for our, and to see that a conservative was also choosing the option of NGOs and charity, I was like, what the fuck am I doing here? It all of a sudden it kind of just didn't make sense anymore. And then I realized that no, you have to struggle against the system.
I think charities and NGOs are, the best thing you could say about them is that they're neutral on the question of humanity.
Well, that neutral just means you'll do a deal with the devil.
But that's it, right? I mean, that's the problem. Whatever, the number of NGOs fighting poverty has vastly increased, and poverty has also gone up. But
can you name a single charity or NGO that is fighting inequality? Poverty? Fighting poverty? Fuck fighting poverty. Capitalism actually, honestly, is pretty good at fighting poverty. If you want to talk about the greatest force for poverty reduction in the history of the planet, it's the Chinese Communist Party, probably, in terms of their turn to capitalism. Literally hundreds of millions of people have been lifted out of extreme poverty.
And they can work at Foxconn now and
get caught
in the suicide nets.
So fuck poverty. Poverty is not the issue that socialists... I mean, obviously we concern ourselves with it, but...
Well, we don't like it. Yeah.
We certainly don't like it. But it's inequality that's the issue. And no NGO will ever challenge that stuff. And anytime if they do, they begin to lose donors.
Yeah.
Because in order to get their donors, they have to have...
You got to have donors. You got to have a difference. You got to have to have donors means you have to have a difference in society, substantial enough for donors to even be a thing. Because you're just, the NGOs don't go out to fucking workplaces and are like, hey, you're getting paid minimum wage. Would you like to become a donor for the Sierra Club? No, they don't do that because those people are like, no, I want to pay rent and have a couple other things too, maybe. And I mean, the kind of money you'd get from from some jackass who's just working a job isn't going to be enough compared to, an idle millionaire who's already basically lived his life.
That reminds me of the other reason why I turned away from the whole NGO thing was that when I heard Craig and Mark Kilberger petitioning towards the rich people, that they're really just hurting too, and they're humans too.
Yeah, they are hurting. They're so isolated. There's so few of them now, actually. So it's what really I think we should appreciate just how
and I was like,
few of them.
And I was like, no, the fucking rich people are siphoning off all of the wealth from the working class and the rest of fucking humanity. They're not our friends. They're the problem. Why are you speaking to them?
I would say this. I would say that why is the working class? Why did Marx and Engels and Rosa Luxemburg and Trotsky and all these other figures? Why did they focus on the working class? It wasn't because they felt that the working class was the most oppressed. It was that they wanted the liberation of all humanity.
Fucking A.
That all of humanity, even the wealthy, even the capitalists, are imprisoned in their own system. I mean, the level of sympathy we have for them is like kind of teeny tiny, but nevertheless.
Hey. Yeah, why not help them out, right? Well, you're talking about with like antibiotics, right?
Yeah, exactly. Antibiotics is a great example of this, that they are fucked over by this as well. We want the liberation of all humanity, not just the working class. The working class is just the vehicle. The working class is the vehicle for the liberation of humanity. For the first time in history, there was a class in society that when it had its own liberation, it didn't merely liberate themselves, but if it actually liberated itself, it would by definition be liberating all of humanity.
Yeah, the rich, the lumpen proletariat.
Everybody suddenly is liberated. For the very first time, there was one class, finally, one section of society, that when it liberated itself, it meant that everybody suddenly was free. There was this open-ended, multi-degrees of freedom that still doesn't exist. The wealth that the capitalists enjoy at the moment is nothing compared to the wealth that all of us could have if we had socialism.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but I would say,
can you imagine how good the wine will be when we have fully automated luxury gay space communism?
Where did the gay come in? I've seen this in the last.
Have you not watched Star Trek?
Question.
I mean, come on, is that not like an obvious feature of the whole show? Okay. They're all, wandering around in onesies.
Okay, so there's one more subject that I want to discuss with you. Well, yeah, there's a lot, but one that I wanted to bring up was Elon Musk, the techno-utopianist. And the ideas of Elon Musk and like we just need more solar panels and wind energy and
buy my cars, buy my batteries.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that think that like Elon Musk, his sort of ideas are the future, and I look at his his boring company where he's digging a bunch of fucking holes underneath Los Angeles to have a sort of like hyperloop for cars or whatever the fuck it is that, and I think that there's a really big difference between the solutions of the techno-utopianists like Elon Musk of we can still preserve our individualism and capitalism and just make it more futuristic and solve the problems that way versus more public, collective solutions like just build a fucking subway instead of just making another maze of cars under Los Angeles that's just going to get congested as soon as it's fucking built. And we see with Puerto Rico that they have the catastrophe from the hurricane that was that caused so much destruction on the island, and Elon Musk is coming in there and be like, hey, why don't you just privatize your entire fucking like electrical grid and just let us handle it? And I think that the solutions offered by the techno-utopianists are kind of actually dystopian and like we'll just privatize everything and let private companies deliver the electricity instead of having publicly owned utilities. So how would you say that the solutions that you deliver in this book are different from what Elon Musk is saying?
Oh, I would say that Elon Musk is not techno-utopian enough.
Ooh.
Yeah, no, straight up. Let's take his most ambitious idea. Colonization of Mars, terraforming of Mars, or even just like sending humans, manned missions to Mars, right?
Yeah.
So I'm working on an article at the moment, writing an article at the moment on a socialist critique of Elon Musk's, well, not just Elon Musk, but all of the other private spaceflight ideas. And, NASA has done some very robust assessments of what it would cost to get humans to Mars, to do a proper manned mission to Mars. And the numbers that they're looking at are, many orders of magnitude larger than the numbers that Elon Musk is saying it would cost to get humans there. And I've looked at Elon Musk's, paper on how he could significantly reduce the cost of getting them there. If you actually know about rocketry, if you know about the enormous challenges that we face as humans in space in terms of the challenges of a low-gravity environment and its impact on the human body, then if we talk about what we would actually have to do to maintain a colony on Mars, the food that we'd have to be producing, the whole kettle of fish that you would need for this. Never mind talking about some sort of sustainable society on Mars, or even further terraforming of Mars. If we're talking about terraforming of Mars, we're talking about numbers, the cost of doing that. It's a wonderful idea. I really think we should be doing this, but there is no way that you can make a lot of money doing this.
Well,
if you can, having said that, if Elon Musk, to his credit, I'll give it to him, if he can actually figure out a way to get a rocket into low Earth orbit and return back to Earth, reusing the rocket in a way that was not achieved with the shuttle program, and I've read no evidence to suggest that he's able to achieve this. But if he could do that, okay, well that's great. All the power to him. But even then, all that he is doing is he is servicing a pre-existing, proven market. We know that as states have established, there's a series of satellites and the International Space Station that need to be serviced. So he's actually just piggybacking off of what states of the public sector have already done. But he cannot convince his investors that there will be any sort of immediate return on investment from colonization of Mars. Private investors are looking for return on investment in the next 4 to 5 years.
Sure.
They might maybe invest 10 years at the outside, but they're not going to be investing hundreds of billions of dollars to in a project that may never return any investment.
You're saying basically that capitalism can't provide these options.
Capitalism cannot get us to Mars.
Yeah.
Private investment.
Capitalism didn't get us to the moon.
Private investment
No, it
hasn't even solved the environmental crisis we're facing on this planet. Even faced with, species extinction as a threat, even. Capitalism is still sort of hemming and hawing and trying to find the profitable way. We'll save humanity as long as states can make it profitable for us to do so.
Capitalism will continue.
If there was a product that was killing humanity, and everybody knew that it was killing humanity, capitalism would, so long as it was profitable, capitalism would still keep producing it. In fact, that's exactly what's happening at the moment with carbon.
Well, that's
with carbon dioxide.
That's the whole issue, and I think that's to me at least one of the major flaws with the the Earth side environmentalist movement. That so much of it is directed towards trying to jigger this whole system into, I don't know, not killing everyone. It's just, hey, wouldn't it be nice? And the capitalists go, yeah, but, is it profitable?
Yeah, exactly.
Is it profitable? And every liberal argument is, how can we make the survival of humanity profitable? That's all they're debating.
Is avoiding humanity's Holocaust profitable? No.
Well, who knows? I mean, at this point, it's rather difficult to say. Even
look at IBM during in the early days of IBM during the Second World War, and so long as it was profitable to sell early bureaucratic cataloging of how many Jews you had killed, they were happy to do so.
Yeah.
So it is not merely that capitalism So long as the massacring of the human race is profitable, they will continue to do it. It's also the other side. So coming back to my point about how Elon Musk is not techno-utopian enough, capitalism cannot deliver all these great dreams that we have. I grew up in the 1980s, the tail end of the space age. There was still the shuttle, space Lego and all of this stuff. And everybody just thought that, well, it was only in 1969 that we'd put men on the moon. So we're just going to keep doing that because that's what happened previously. It was not 60 years between the first manned flight and the first man on the moon. And that's an amazing leap forward. And so in the 1980s, we just sort of, everybody was just assuming that we would just continue on and continue on. And we didn't. And now we can look back and we say, oh, there was neoliberalism, and neoliberalism killed the space program. There was no need to, once the Soviet Union started to decline, there was no need for capitalism to show the best of capitalism, which was not even that NASA was capitalist. It was a capitalist country, but they had to have a public sector entity spending hundreds of millions of dollars, public money, to get men on the moon, to show this is the best that capitalism could achieve to compete against the Soviet Union. Once the Soviet Union was clearly on its deathbed,
who cares, right?
Who cares? We're just we don't need this anymore.
There's no profit motive there.
No profit motive. Yeah. There is no profit motive to get us into space. The motive to get us into space is scientific discovery and freedom, and the celebration and extension of humanity. If that's not profitable, then we're not going to fucking do it. So that's what I mean when I say that Elon Musk is not techno-utopian enough. Socialism offers these grand dreams, or rather the possibility of realizing these grand dreams that we used to have in the 50s and 60s and 70s and even the 80s with my space Lego had. Now nobody has it anymore. We're gone.
No, it's all
now it's a joke.
Apocalypticism and zombies and whatnot.
Frederick Jameson's line that Zizek uses, it is easier to imagine the end of capitalism, or easier to imagine the end of the world than it is to imagine the end of capitalism.
And it sure is, because, man, capitalism is everywhere now, and what else are you going to do? And I think that's the to me the major flaw of the environmentalist movement, which, if I were to look at the greatest political failures of the 20th century, I would actually personally I would say it was the environmentalist movement. At least when it came to the Stalinist Soviet Union and all the rest of its similars. At least you could say, hey, healthcare, education, things had been improved. But when it came to the environmentalist movement that grew out of the 20th century, what are we getting out of it now? What is the act? Because the planet is no more safer today than it was then, but we're no more better off either. So what the hell?
Well, okay, we have had some victories, and I do think that we have to give it up to the environmental movement for raising some of these issues. When people say, the Soviet Union, Eastern Europe, terrible environmental destruction, they're right. I would say that we have since learned about that, and now we've tried to adapt to that. But the solutions that the environmental movement are articulating do not critique capitalism, and that's the problem. The market is the cause.
That's really my point, is that at least those the Eastern Bloc countries, did some of the achieved goals that are laudable to some extent, with unnecessary suffering and all the rest of it. But for all the suffering that environmentalism has heaped upon us and has told us that we should do without, it still hasn't actually gotten where we want to go. Environmentalists seem to just be happy to just tell us to do without, and then who cares if we do or don't?
Let me put it another way. So, in terms of the ozone layer crisis, when we identified that, it was not the market that solved it. It was a non-market intervention. Now we have actually solved it. I mean, not completely. It'll still take about another 30 to 40 years for the ozone layer to completely heal. So the problem is not being exacerbated anymore. We solved that problem, but it required non-market intervention took regulation. Basically, what we are arguing for, non-market interventions. If we just left, but with the ozone layer, the problem was caused by a handful of commodities, fairly easy to regulate away. With climate change, every single fucking commodity and service on the earth depends in some level in their supply chain on fossil fuels. It is so difficult. So long as those commodities are profitable, so long as fossil fuels are profitable, it is so difficult for us to just regulate it other way, because basically you're regulating the entirety of society. What is socialism? But we're saying we want to democratically regulate all of the economy, not just we want everything to be democratic, not just politics. We want the economy to be democratic as well. And this is the challenge that we're facing. So it's not that environmentalists have not achieved anything. It's not that regulation hasn't achieved anything. It's that so long as we continue to depend, or so long as environmentalists continue to not pay attention to capitalism, and when we say that, we really mean the real structures of capitalism, the market, private property, the profit motive, the extraction of surplus value, the whole package of of Marxist analysis. And all they're just talking about is just size and growth, which are actually completely outside of socialist Marxist analysis. They're completely missing the boat.
Okay,
I'm agreeing with you. I'm not like...
No, fair enough.
There's one thing I want to bring up just to distinguish, because the Soviet Union didn't really have a good environmental track record. In fact, there was an entire sea that was dried up just to make room for agriculture. So if we're trying to make a difference between like the Elon Musk utopians and the capitalists and whatnot, and saying that we need more state planning, well, more state planning doesn't have a really good track record.
Well, you know what?
So
actually,
far,
I would say if you look at China now, I am not endorsing China as some socialist model, but it's not capitalist. I mean, it's kind of this weird
in between
kind of strange, sort of authoritarian, sort of market, sort of state plan, like very heavy state planning, state direction of the economy.
Yeah.
A few years ago, they got Jesus on climate change. They got Jesus. Like fuck. After years and years of fighting against it, because like if the Westerners are telling us about this stuff, and like, but that means that we can't develop. But their scientists were saying, like, this the capitalist imperialist, it's kind of true, actually. It's not just an imperialist fiction. Like, this is actually a big thing. Also, air pollution.
For China, it was a way for them to provide global leadership, too.
And overnight, China became the biggest builder of wind power, absolutely and relatively. Biggest build out of...
In the world?
In the world. Solar, hydroelectric, nuclear. Over the last 3 years, their emissions have peaked. This year, they've gone up a little bit. We'll see whether it returns to a growth path or if it's actually peaked and they're going to actually begin to decline. But it's been flat for the last 3 years. The prior 10 years to the flattening out of their emissions growth, flattening out of their emissions growth, they had an emissions growth of 8% year on year. And then suddenly, no emissions growth. Nobody else in the world has achieved a turnaround that rapidly. It's incredible. Now, I'm a socialist, I'm a Democrat, I'm a civil libertarian. In no way am I defending the Chinese Communist Party. But what they've been able to do is, because they can just intervene in a non-market fashion, they can turn on a dime. If the elites have decided to do this, they can do it. But what we say as democratic socialists is that's not enough. We don't say non-market, therefore socialism. If something is not, if all you had to do was something is non-market, then is socialism. Then you can say that the Pentagon is socialist. The Pentagon is not a market entity; it's an entirely public sector entity. But that's not fucking socialism. So non-market activity is a necessary condition for socialism, but it is not a sufficient condition for socialism. It has to be democratic as well. So what we've done there with China, we've said, in principle, we've proven that with non-market activity is much easier, much more rapid to achieve the goals that we decide as a society. But China didn't decide these goals as a society. It was just the elites in the society that decided. What if that were democratically decided?
That would be way better. Yeah.
Well, it'd also be more consistent. I mean, I think that people would democratically decide that they wouldn't want to die.
I would hope so. But you know what? Honestly, if the majority of people, if we had a democratic socialist global society, and everybody democratically decided, well, you know what, we're going to keep pumping out some greenhouse gases, I would think that's kind of shitty, but I'd have to say, well, that's what the people who decided. I'm just going to keep on trucking on and trying to convince people that the argument is wrong. That's dumb. Yeah. But you've decided it, so...
Well, at least that forms... I mean, that is the foundation for actual decision-making and actual, I think, solutions. Is, even if people decide things that are rather stupid or short-sighted or whatever, at least if there's a democratic process there, you can... do something with that. You can make a case for something better. And, I mean, the whole fucking principle of socialism is that inevitably people's material conditions will inform their politics and will inform their decision-making. And that's going to inevitably lead to, better decision-making, better
not
politics.
Killing ourselves through, environmental genocide. Yeah,
or
I
whatever.
mean, if you have a democratically controlled economy, then people will make decisions in their interests, and it's in everybody's interest to not kill themselves through environmental genocide. So I do think that the premise of your book is fucking fantastic, that within the limits of capitalism, there is no solution to the environmental crisis, that it requires a democratic planning of the economy and a liberation of the working class in order to solve the problems of global warming and climate change and rampant environmental destruction. Because as it stands right now, polluting the environment is really profitable, and exploiting the environment and skirting around environmental laws and regulations is profitable. And that's the primary reason why we have such a fucking massive problem on our hands. And the solution is not, as you say in the book, organic, locally woven carrot pants or turnip wranglers or, solar panel salesmen.
Yogurt weavers.
That we do need big nationally democratically planned environmental solutions that involve everybody and take everybody's interest into account.
I mean, if I can say just one more little thing on this. I would have a critique of eco-modernism as well. Now, to some extent, I consider myself an eco-modernist in that it's a group of people who are environmentalists who have recognized that actually modernity is the way that we can solve some of these issues. So rather than going away from industrial agriculture, we go toward organic agriculture and locally grown carrot pants. Mm-hmm. It's sustainable intensification of agriculture, reducing the amount of land that we use, instead of going for variable, unreliable solar and wind, although they have their place. It will overwhelmingly require a global shift towards nuclear energy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's a whole range of different liberal left environmentalists who've adopted the moniker of eco-modernism to express this ideology, I'm very, very sympathetic to this. Very, very sympathetic. The problem is that with this is that they've also not identified the market as a problem, and so they also are looking to a particular technological solution. They happen to choose the right technological solutions, as far as I'm concerned, but they're kind of missing the boat to some extent in that. If we're going to be talking about a mass build-out of nuclear power, at the moment, you can't build out any little bit of nuclear, just as you can't build out a little bit of large-scale hydro. It has to be a mass public sector project. There's no profitable way you can do it. The money that it costs to the upfront costs of nuclear power are enormous. Overall, from a system level perspective, nuclear is the cheapest energy you can imagine. But that's over the long term. Up front, it's incredibly expensive. So no private sector entity.
It doesn't really work.
It's not going to work in the private
Yeah.
sector. You are inevitably going to have a public sector build-out of nuclear power. So I wrote this article last year when Bernie Sanders was, Bernie Sanders was still sort of building and like winning state by state,
primaries and
primary.
stuff.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And but Bernie Sanders is anti-nuclear, and I wrote this article in the New Republic saying, Bernie, I'm totally a supporter of you. You're awesome. I really hope you succeed. But your position on nuclear is not only wrong because we need nuclear for all these different reasons that we talked about earlier tonight. More than that, you're the only guy who can make nuclear work.
Yeah. Instead of it being this corporate fucking underfunded
Well, they don't want to
project.
do it.
The private sector cannot make nuclear work at the moment because it's so
You can't
expensive.
even. How are you going to insure a nuclear power plant?
It's even worse than that because these assholes have been hounded by environmentalists who've said nuclear power is terrible. And so what has actually happened in the case of North America is that the average nuclear power plant is poorly maintained because funding has been stymied by environmentalists who want to shut down nuclear power, but we can't really do away with a load-bearing power source. So, hey, why not just give them less money, right? I mean, that is what has happened in Ontario, particularly, where we got a bunch of nuclear power plants that are kind of old and crappy and probably should be replaced, but we can't replace them because to build new ones will be continuously obstructed by environmentalists who are insisting on us essentially, keeping the old, crappy, potentially dangerous power plants running.
I do think that we need to be defending these old, crappy nuclear power plants because at the moment, for all of their problems, and there are problems, nobody who's a nuclear defender would say that there aren't some problems with these.
Well, sure.
They still are at least clean electricity.
Well,
and
fine.
if we retire them at the moment, I know you're not saying this. The issue that I sort of wanted to hit upon was that the irony here that we're facing is that eco-modernists, who are basically liberal lefties who accept capitalism, are defending nuclear. But they don't recognize that what you need is something much more thoroughgoing, like a sort of democratic socialism, or at least some left social democracy, to deliver on the thing that they want to achieve. And the very people who would be the most able to deliver on the thing that eco-modernists want, built out of nuclear power, left social democracy, is the most opposed to this. So, ironically, Bernie Sanders and Jeremy Corbyn, the best placed to deliver internationally, other than maybe the Chinese Communist Party, a true mass build-out of nuclear power, are beholden to the green left that has convinced them that they shouldn't be doing
I
this.
find it funny that the green left is of course, the most opposed to the whole global warming thing. We need to stop global warming. We need to stop climate change. We need to reduce our emissions. But they're also the very same people that are most opposed to nuclear energy because it's not natural. It's against the environment. Blah 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 blah. It creates nuclear waste. And to be honest here, before I read your book, I was in that camp. I was against nuclear power because it created waste and that's bad and so we shouldn't do it.
I used to be against nuclear power too.
Yeah, until you saw the radioactive light. And but it's funny that the solutions, the best solutions to the environmental crisis and to the climate change crisis are time and time again find themselves in the crosshairs of the green left and the very people that you would expect to be supporting.
We're shot by both sides. We're shot by the neoliberals, fossil fuel companies that are presenting enormous barriers to the clean transition. On the other side, we're shot by the green left, anti-development, anti-nuclear side as well. I really think that if we manage to solve this problem, I think in 100 years' time, historians will be writing that the greatest challenge to humanity solving the climate crisis, ironically, came as much from the green left as it came from the fossil fuel companies.
Okay, so let's bring this back to something I briefly mentioned earlier. Site C.
Right. The hydroelectric dam.
The hydroelectric dam.
That everybody in this province hates.
Well, not everybody.
Well,
in fact,
almost
actually,
everybody.
The surveys consistently show that a majority of British Columbians support the build out of Site C.
Well, I as an
But there's a majority of people
as a pseudo environmentalist, as someone who wouldn't never call himself an environmentalist first and foremost, I think hydroelectric is a good idea. Generally.
Most of the people that are opposed to Site C are the kind of people that would be against global warming, for example.
Your Western Wilderness Committee types.
And if we want to actually seriously combat global warming, then a project like Site C is kind of par for the course. We need to produce as much electricity as possible, as much renewable energy as possible, and there are environmental concerns associated with hydroelectric dams, especially in the same scope as Site C, but does it not... Is it not for the greater good?
Okay, so if you're concerned about climate change, then you recognize immediately that we have to very rapidly decarbonize transport, heating, and industry in this province, in this country, and around the world, obviously. In British Columbia and Canada, we're not too bad in terms of decarbonizing our electricity system. We have the fourth cleanest electricity grid in the world, after France, Sweden, and Finland, I believe. And the reason is because the vast majority of our electricity comes from, in Canada, comes from a mixture of hydroelectricity and nuclear. Norway is entirely hydroelectric. Sweden is a mixture of hydroelectric and nuclear. And Finland is a mixture of nuclear and some little bits of fossil fuels. France is entirely nuclear. So we're up there. We're doing really good in terms of our clean electricity, but we've been really bad about decarbonizing our transport, heating, and and industry. And Canada, we're the most the least population dense country in the world after Australia. The reason why Australia is the most population or the least population dense is because the entire center of the country is basically unlivable. They have a gigantic desert.
It was a prison camp, so.
But basically means that they're incredibly population diffuse, not population dense. And Canada is the second. In fact, if you take away the fact that the middle of the country in Australia is basically unlivable or almost unlivable, Canada is actually the most population diffuse country in the world, the least population dense country in the world. So that means that for us to get from one population center to another, or to transmit any products from one population center to another, we have to send products an incredibly long way. That means that we have to expend fossil fuels in transport, we have to burn an enormous amount of fossil fuels to transport anything, or just even to send people from one place to another place.
Right.
In addition to that, in Canada, we are a very, very cold country. And in the summer times, we're a very, very hot country in central Canada. So we have a lot of air conditioning and we have a lot of heating. And most of that in the country, even if we're using some clean energy, there's still a fairly sizable fossil fuel element of that. So we desperately need to decarbonize our heating and transport. About a third of the energy use, so the entire, not just electricity, but a third of the entire energy use in British Columbia is electricity. So that means that two-thirds of our energy use comes from fossil fuels. So for heating and transport, almost entirely, some industry. That has to be decarbonized. Some of it will come from alternative fuel sources, maybe some biofuels, but we also know that biofuels are very carbon intensive. So the vast majority of it, realistically, it's going to be through electrification. So we have to electrify transport and heating and industry.
And that's going to require projects like Site C.
Yeah, exactly, because even though we can use some wind, some solar, and in fact we can actually use quite a bit of wind, because even though it's intermittent, it is plentiful. Solar is intermittent and not plentiful, because we're a very northerly country.
Well, it's BC.
It's
BC.
Come on. It's very cloudy. Just not even just cloudy, but we're very northerly.
Yeah.
So the solar insolation, the solar radiance that we get in this part of the northern part of the world is very, very small compared to the solar insolation.
No,
the amount of sun that you get in a Morocco or a California or in India or Australia.
We're probably not going to see the sun for another 3 months from now.
Yeah, and all things considered, even if you do capture it in batteries are prone to self-immolation. So
it's not so much that. I mean, that is certainly there are issues around the safety around batteries, but it's more that the amount of battery that you would need. And if you think that batteries come with no environmental impact, but
then you're wrong.
Then you're crazy. You're having a laugh.
Tell us about the environmental concerns regarding batteries.
Batteries. They aren't delivered from the sky by green pixies.
Whoa! Hold on. I thought that was.
You thought they were?
Yeah.
Well, the way the environmentalists talk about it, sure. Yeah. Okay, we've gone over a lot of the problems with environmentalism and sort of their the limitations of it and sort of how it's gone. But would you give Leigh? Would on the whole, what kind of grade or what kind of assessment would you give to environmentalism? And sort of in your book, what do you think its overall sort of result has been?
I'd give it a C.
Hey, we fixed the ozone problem.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, acid rain isn't a thing anymore, I guess.
Exactly. Environmentalism was very, very necessary. It was absolutely right that at the beginning in the 1960s and 1970s, in many respects, it was very working class oriented. Early environmentalism, very concerned about pollution, primarily of working class neighborhoods, lead pollution, these sorts of things. So it was absolutely a very necessary movement. The problem, as with many of these sorts of things, is when these movements do not begin to incorporate structural analyses of the causes of the problem, instead of it being the local company that is polluting, and beginning to understand why would it be that a company, once knowing this, continues to pollute. You have to begin to turn to explanations that depend upon a structural understanding of capitalism, of the profit motive, of the market, of private property, of the extraction of surplus value. These are the things that begin to explain why, even when somebody, a property owner, a company, now has been told that this bad thing is happening to people, that they continue to produce the commodity that is dangerous to the rest of society. So that's why I would give environmentalism a C grade. Is you've identified a problem, but you haven't identified the cause of the problem. And worse than that, again, why you get a C grade and maybe even get an F grade on this, is that your identification of what the problem is, growth or humans or progress or industrial society or technology as being a problem, is actually deeply retrograde and undermining the thing that we need to solve, not merely in terms of environmental issues, but as humanists, as liberals, as socialists, as people deeply, as democratic socialists, as Democrats, however we want to describe the progressive movement, people who want to eliminate the limitations imposed on certain classes of people, on certain races, genders, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They've not merely misidentified the cause, they are actually recreating and exacerbating the very problem that they want to overcome.
To finish up this extra special episode of the podcast, tell us about your new book.
Yeah, in brief.
Okay,
briefly.
So very briefly.
When is it coming out?
It's supposed to be coming out in fall 2018 from Verso. So it's called The People's Republic of Walmart.
Shit.
And it's about some of the issues that we've been talking about tonight, about the question of planning and trying to revive the idea on the left of paying attention to the importance of the challenge of the market, why the market ends up creating problems, and why planning needs to be the center of our conversation.
And democratically so.
Democratic planning, yes, absolutely. So,
well, fucking
amazing. Hopefully Ben won't have to buy as many of that copies as he's bought of your last book. Although who knows, maybe you'd like him to. No, it's been great to have you with us. We'll certainly have you on again.
Really, finally, I've been able to have a conversation with. I normally when I do these things, I'm having conversations with liberals or center lefties or whatever, which are lovely.
Oh, they're all very nice people. Don't get me wrong.
It's just that their ideas are wrong.
But it is the first time that I've actually had a conversation about my book with Marxists. So this is it's been a pleasure.
Fucking A, man.
All around.
Because all I've done, really, the whole thing of the book is just updating Engels' ancient old argument against Malthus.
Don't sell yourself
for the
short.
Anthropocene.
You got a lot of good
You are the right
metaphors
man for the job.
I don't know.
Leigh Phillips, you're the right man for the
I
job.
just want more people to believe in these sorts of things.
And I will keep buying your book and keep lending it
until the revolution.
And losing track of who I've lent it out to.
Anyway, well, thanks for listening to the show. If you want to buy us a beer, check us out on Patreon. If you want to send us some hate mail, check us out on Twitter. And otherwise, we are on SoundCloud and YouTube.
We'll see you next time. Hopefully, we'll have Leigh back on the show sometime.
I'd love to come back soon. Yeah.
Fucking right. Hasta la Victoria siempre, comrades.